Good morning, everyone. I know it's been a while since I've done a devotional. Christy and I were actually on vacation for 2 weeks, and that's part of the reason why we didn't do it. We needed a break. And now that we've come back, since we went out of the state of New York and we've come back, now we need to be on quarantine. So actually, I'll be doing these videos, at least for the next week, from home. And but I want us to stay connected, and I want to go over the next few days through the book of Nehemiah. I preached from Nehemiah before I went on vacation, just one sermon, covered the whole book really, but I want to take some time going through it again. And so Nehemiah, the setting and person, Nehemiah was alive during the Persian Empire. Israel had fallen, the nation of Judah and Israel had fallen to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. They had been taken to Babylon. Jerusalem had been destroyed. The wall had been destroyed and burned down, and the temple had been destroyed and burned. And then they were taken captive, and a few stragglers were left behind. For over 70 years, now 70 years have passed, and as God had prophesied through the prophets, he allowed Israel to return. Nebuchadnezzar was conquered by Darius of Persia, and he allowed Israel to return. And in the book of Ezra, we have the rebuilding of the temple. Then in chapter 1, Nehemiah, it says that he's serving the king. He's a cupbearer to the king, which means he's an important person. He's a confidant, a trusted person to the king, an advisor to the king. He would stand next to the king. And it says here that in verse 2, chapter 1, verse 2, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and all about Jerusalem. And they said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province, or who are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. So they come back from Jerusalem. So his brother was able to go visit, comes back, and then tells him kind of what the situation is there, what things look like. The city is still in ruin, and the walls are still destroyed, and the people are in disgrace. When I heard this, said Nehemiah, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. Then I said, right? So he's been praying for days. Now he tells us this last prayer. It seems like it's the last prayer, but he's been praying for days. But I want to see what all that we're praying for, all the things that we're seeing in our nation, and the deep need that we experience. We need to be broken. In the book of Luke, you see this pattern where people are approaching Jesus, and those that he's encountering normally have two things in common: a sense of desperation and a sense of total dependency on God or on Christ. Well, here he is completely broken. He realizes that there's just this need that exists, and he is heartbroken over what's happening in Jerusalem and in Israel. So he begins to pray. So again, our response to what we need and want to see God do needs to be prayer. It needs to be humbling, weeping, right? If my people will humble themselves, we need to humble ourselves and pray. And then he begins to pray, and he exalts God, right? He exalts God, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God. He acknowledges who God is, right? So as we approach God, again, acknowledging, when Jesus taught his disciples to pray, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. It starts with attributing to God the glory. First, it starts with Father, relationship and covenant, but then it's who he is. He is the incredible, wonderful, awesome, perfect God. And then he begins to pray, and he confesses their sins. He doesn't say these people, he confesses and repents along with the people of Israel and for the people of Israel. So when we come before the Lord right now, it can't be just pointing fingers. It's got to be, Lord, we have sinned. Have mercy on us. And then he says, verse 8, remember the instructions you gave your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But so, okay, well, why does he want to remind God of that? Remember what you said. If we are unfaithful, you will scatter us among the nations. That's exactly what happened. Israel, Nehemiah included, he is now in Persia because of Israel's sin, and they've been scattered among the nations. So why does he bring this up? Because he says, remember you said when this happens, right? You will scatter, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen as a dwelling for my name. So he's reminding them, okay, this has happened because of our sin. Remember, you said when we did this, you would scatter us. But you also said if we turn to you, that you will return us to this land. And that had already been happening. So now he's praying for his people, and he's saying, Lord, be attentive to the prayer of this servant, the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king. So he's about to ask something of the king. He's been praying for days. So what we can understand and read about what's happening here is that Nehemiah has been humbled. He's been praying. He's been crying out for Jerusalem. But he doesn't just pray. He's been praying. And during this time, as he's been praying, he begins to have an idea. Maybe he knows it's from God. Maybe he doesn't know if it's from God or not. But he has a desire to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the wall. He wants to leave his comfortable position serving the king and go on this journey all the way across the desert to Jerusalem and rebuild it. So he may be very confident, or maybe he's just thinking, okay, God, I want to do this. I'm not just going to pray. I will take a step. I will step out. I'm not just going to pray. I'm going to act. I'm not just going to pray about God moving or God rebuilding Jerusalem. I'm going to take a step. And I ask for favor as I approach the king. So then in chapter 2, he approaches the king, and the king says, what do you need? And he says, allow me to return. But what I want us to see here again is his request, his posture. He's humbling himself before the Lord, weeping, identifying, not being accusatory and praying that all these people are sinners, but he's identifying, we have sinned against you, but you have said, right? So you have promised. And he's not just praying his own prayers, his own desires. He's reminding God, this is what you have said, Lord. And that's incredibly important. As we are praying, as you draw near to God, there are a lot of things we want God to do. But our prayers need to move. This is essential. We need to move from a requesting what we desire to a hearing what God desires. Jesus taught us again and again. He said it, and in Revelation, it's continually reminded to the church. We are reminded, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Right? He doesn't say, he who has a mouth, let him ask, but he who has ears to hear. Our problem isn't talking to God. We ask all the time. Our problem is, what are we asking for? Are we asking for our kingdom or for his kingdom? And so what we need is to understand that I think there was a moment here where he was saying, okay, I'm not asking this for me. Nehemiah was fine right where he was. He didn't need to leave everything and go and potentially put his life and his career at risk, but he was willing to do that. He wasn't asking for himself. He was asking for God and for God's people, Israel. And it's an incredible story because the wall gets rebuilt in record time. I think like 52 days, he builds the entire wall around Jerusalem. It's an incredible testimony of leadership, spiritual leadership that doesn't just pray, but then it acts, and he has incredible results. So I just want to encourage you with this because we need to be praying this way. We're desiring to see God do an incredible work in our hearts, our lives, our city. I want to see God move in my life, and I know that if it's going to happen, it's going to happen because we are on our knees. And then we get up off of our knees and go and put things and put our faith into action. Actually step out on what we've been saying. We believe God's going to do it. Then take a step and do it. But make sure that you don't just believe because you want it so bad, but you believe because you have heard the Lord speak to you. So may the Lord bless you, and may you hear him as you speak to him. May your ears be open to hear what he has to say to you, to me, to our church. God bless.